Stone Brothers production.
Hello subscribers and new viewers. Welcome to our serial killer series from A through Z. Today we are in Maine and already worked on 19 states so far. If you haven't seen the other states we have worked on, go on and check it out under our playlist below. We are almost halfway there and glad you guys followed our journey throughout the states. Let us know what state you are from or country because soon we will start to write on other countries in future videos. Sorry for the lack of videos these past few months as things have been hectic with finding a new place to live. Thanks for sticking around and for the support. Be sure to like, share, and leave comments below. Today we are discussing 3 serial killers in Maine, and be sure to subscribe for more content like this. Thanks and enjoy the video. Number 3. James R. Hicks. James Hicks was born in Etna, Maine on April 17, 1951. It was rumored that Hicks committed horrendous acts of cruelty upon animals throughout his childhood. Sometime in 1969, James met his future wife named Jenny Sear, married her a year after in 1970, and had a child named Veronica together in 1971. From 1974 through 1977, Hicks worked in several jobs in the construction field in various locations of Maine. On July 18, 1977, live-in babysitter Susan Maley, who moved into their home in June of 1997, told Jenny about James making sexual advances towards her the day before. On the same day, Jenny visited her sister, Denise Clark. She brought her children and the stay-in babysitter while telling her sister about the dissatisfactions she has with James. She also told her sister that if James didn't move out the next weekend, she would move out herself and would take the children with her. Afterward, Jenny, James, Sean, and Susan had dinner together in his trailer while their daughter was staying at Miss Clark's house. During the dinner, James had a feeling that Jenny was upset over something, but wasn't sure if Susan had mentioned to his wife about the sexual advances he committed. He questioned Jenny afterward, but she told him that they would discuss why she was upset later. After James tried kissing his wife and she rejected him, he threw dishes in the sink with anger. Susan left on a date later in the evening and didn't return until 4 a.m. the next day. In the early morning hours of July 19, 1977, a neighbor overheard Jenny screaming, a man swearing, and a small child crying. The neighbor specifically remembers hearing Jenny scream out in a panic, begging James not to kill her. The trailer became quiet afterward, and the neighbor started seeing a light on in the trailer. Soon after, they noted hearing noises that sounded like wood being chopped or sawed. Susan returned to the trailer around 4 a.m. and felt something was wrong. When entering the living room, she found James sitting in a chair watching television while Jenny was lying in an awkward position with her head pointed down on the wooden armrest and her hair covering her face. James mentioned that Jenny was sleeping when Susan entered the living room, but she sensed something was wrong with her and the fact that she was in a bathrobe. Afterward, Susan went to lie down in her bed, heard slippers scuffling across the floor, and heard Hicks' trailer door open. She was too afraid to investigate what she heard, so she hid her head under the covers and went to sleep a little after. What really happened that day was that he strangled his wife to death with a belt and hid the evidence throughout the day. He also lied to Jenny's family on multiple occasions. James reported his wife missing the same day he murdered her, including Jenny's mother named Myra Sear, who reported her missing on the 23rd of July. On July 23rd, Deputy Timothy Richardson questioned James in his home, and he admitted to pushing his wife around but never hurt her. After James left for work, Richardson investigated his home, but he couldn't find any evidence of foul play. He questioned Susan afterward, and she said that Hicks wouldn't allow her to leave the trailer since the 19th of July. Susan left Maine to live with her friend in Ohio sometime in late July or the beginning of August 1977. Her friend encouraged Susan to call the police for any information, but she refused to do so. On August 15th, 1977, Jenny's investigation of her disappearance was going cold with no evidence of foul play and no luck of finding her whereabouts. On October 16th, 1982, Hicks met Geralyn Towers at the Gateway Lounge Bar located in Newport, Maine, and offered to purchase some drinks for her. Later that night, one of the bartenders claimed she saw Towers exit the bar with Hicks and saw them leaving from a convenience store, offering Towers a ride to a Newport swimming hole. After they finished swimming, James sat into the back seat of his car. Towers entered later, and once she faced away from him, he strangled her to death with his bare hands. Based on his year 2000 confession, James claimed he kept Towers' remains in the trunk of his car for a few weeks, dismembered her when he had the chance, and buried her remains in a field on his property. Officer James Ricker helped out Geralyn's family while they put up a local ad in the newspaper to receive information on her whereabouts. On October 20th, 1982, Corporal Eugene Robinson joined Officer Ricker in the investigation. By the middle of November, Robinson received an anonymous voice message while interviewing many bar patrons who pointed at Hicks being the suspect in the case. Robinson then questioned Hicks at his home in Etna, Maine, and he denied being at the bar on October 16th, knowing nothing about her disappearance. Corporal Robinson met up with the bartender serving that day on November 20th and confirmed Hicks was leaving the bar with Towers on the night of October 16th. Before going to question him again, Robinson discovered that Hicks' first wife had been missing for over 5 years, talking with the Etna mailman. Hicks was very uncooperative, denying being at the Gateway Lounge for the second interview, and his girlfriend called his attorney after returning home from work. Detective Dick Reichel, a retired Maine State Police officer, was contacted by Officer Ricker since there are no leads in the murder case of Towers and the possibility of a single or double homicide. On March 22, 1983, Detective Reichel discovered that Hicks and the live-in babysitter Susan Matley were living in Massachusetts. Local and state police decided to re-examine Jenny Hicks' disappearance because of no leads to Towers' disappearance. On October 4, 1983, Detective Reichel took Jenny's case to the grand jury and an indictment is issued for the murder of Jenny Hicks against her husband, James Jimmy Hicks. He's arrested and charged for the murder of his wife on October 7th while pleading not guilty on the same day during his arraignment in Bangor, Maine. On March 15, 1984, the jury deliberated for 9 hours and found Hicks guilty in fourth-degree homicide, which in present day is considered manslaughter. They found him guilty with the help of Susan Matley, although there is no murder weapon. On August 22, 1984, Hicks married Linda Marquis in the Thomaston State Prison of Maine. About 7 years later, Hicks was released from prison, being described as a well-behaved inmate. From 1991 through 1992, Hicks had 2 divorces while constantly cheating and fighting with his now-passed wives. He had a daughter with a woman who he had an affair with named Louise Robertson and married her soon after. During the same year, 1992, he denied having paternal custody, even though a blood test confirms the daughter is his. Sometime in 1994, the affair between Hicks and Louise ended, and she claims he never said anything about his first wife or acknowledged having other children. Around the same time, the Maine State Police are actively investigating the disappearance and were contacted by Vance Tibbetts, who is Geralyn's brother. He also served time in the same prison as Hicks for attempted murder. Tibbetts confronted Hicks, and he claimed Geralyn left the bar with a trucker. Later in 1994, Hicks met another lady named Lynn Ann Willette at his Twin City motel job and moved into her Brewer, Maine apartment back in 1995. On August 1995, Hicks had a feeling Tibbetts was stalking him and filed a complaint with the Brewer Police Department. James Hicks was interviewed by Detective Zamboni on February 1996 about taking a polygraph test, but he was reluctant to do so and suggested doing it later. James murdered his girlfriend, Lynn Willette, by strangling her in an apartment she rented on May 26 after an argument about his past. Hicks reported her missing a day later to Brewer Police Department, lying like he did with his other victims in the past, and her car wasn't found until May 31st, 1996 at a truck stop in Hernan off I-95. Authorities interviewed many people who knew both James and Lynn, and police didn't find any evidence suggesting Lynn was dead or that James killed her. On September 1996, about 3 to 4 months after Lynn's disappearance, he moved in with his 18-year-old girlfriend, Brandy Mayo, and sometime in 1997 they had a daughter. Soon after they married, they moved to Bangor, Maine, and then Levelland, Texas in June 1999, but Maine's Department of Human Services took custody of the couple's daughter. The couple had another child together in Texas on April 2000, and Levelland Police Department received information from Maine's department with the knowledge of Hicks' dangerous behavior, so the department took their child away within days after being born. On April 8th, an older lady named June Moss contacted Hicks, who was working as a handyman and did work for her, claiming she wrote a check for his work to a closed account. He arrived back at her home, pointed a gun at her head, and threatened to kill her if she didn't give him $1,250. He also asked her for the title of her car, forced her to write out a suicide note, and drink a full bottle of cough syrup. While Hicks was in the back of the home, June ran to a neighbor's house after surviving her attack, where she called the authorities. The neighbor saw Hicks leaving June's home in a van and followed him back to his place while getting authorities to arrest him shortly after arriving at his home. On April 10, 2000, he was taken to Lubbock County Jail and charged him with aggravated robbery of an elderly person while his bond was set at $250,000. Hicks' brother Steve contacts Detective Zamboni requesting a deal in exchange for an extradition to Maine. Both Zamboni and Hicks had a long talk about a deal for him to extradite to Maine. Zamboni changed Hicks' 3-victim count to 5 after a successful strategy to receive more information on the other 2 victims, who were Towers and his first wife, Jenny. After receiving the aggravated robbery charge in Lubbock County, Texas, the judge waives extradition to Maine until an arrest warrant is issued. Zamboni obtained an arrest warrant for Hicks, and he was finally returned to Penobscot County, Maine. Hicks then showed where the remains of the other victims are, stating he dismembered both Jenny and Towers before burying them. Hicks disclosed the methods used in his killings and was indicted for the murders of Towers and Willette in Penobscot County, Maine, pleading guilty. George Bush, who was the Texas governor at the time, and Maine governor, Angus King, signed an executive agreement to transfer Hicks to Maine to serve his sentence. Hicks was finally found guilty for the murders of Willette and Towers. The judge stated Hicks showed no remorse for the crimes and sentences he received, plus restitution was awarded to both families. Hicks was also sent to Texas and back for a 55-year sentence in the assault of June Moss. Instead of serving 55 years in Texas, he is serving all his sentences in the Maine State Prison in Warren. To this day, he is still incarcerated in the Maine State Prison. Number 2. Constance M. Fisher. Though there is not much on Constance Fisher's early life, she was born in 1929 and adopted at an early age in Fairfield, Maine. It shows she was married and had 3 kids with Carl Fisher, but no real date was official due to lack of resources to her case. Around March 8, 1954, Constance murdered 3 of her children in her family's second-floor apartment in Waterville, Maine. First, she took the life of her youngest, who was basically almost a year old, by wrapping the child with a blanket and smothering the baby in her crib. Next was Daniel Fisher, who was 4 years old, by smothering him in a blanket on the couch. The last child was the oldest, whose name was Richard, as he returned home from school. He was excited to see the mother when she offered to run a warm bath for him on a chilly afternoon. After playing with him for a few minutes in the tub, Constance wrapped her hands around his neck and submerged his head under the water. She had to physically climb into the tub with him to force him under the water. After killing her children, Constance drank part of a bottle of poisonous shampoo and climbed under the bed of an electric blanket. Unfortunately for Fisher, she survived her own suicide. When word came out, she stayed in a mental asylum for about 5 years. After numerous appeals from her husband, Carl Fisher, and having been declared cured, she was sent home. Around this time, her release from the mental institution marked the beginnings of a new era in the treatment of the mentally ill in America as the nation moved to phase out the large state mental hospitals. It was recommended by at least one doctor that Constance should be sterilized, which was a common procedure in those years. Instead of the doctor's recommendations, Constance returned to her new home that Carl had built, and she immediately became pregnant. 2 years later, she gave birth to a second child, and within 3 years, a third child. All the names of the children were Kathleen, Michael, and Natalie. When the children became older, their mother killed them by drowning all 3 in their Kennebec County home. One was 6 years old, 4 years old, and 9 months old. Carl came home and saw his beautiful older daughter face down in the tub, to which he ran out of the house, never to return. It was Father Joseph Brannigan who went in and found out what happened. He found all 3 children dead, and Constance in a comatose from an overdose of pills. The house was in shambles of rotting food, toys, and clutter. Brannigan later left the priesthood and started a halfway house for the mentally ill in Portland. Later, he became a legislator and a state senator. This was Constance's final time out in the public, and she remained in the state hospital for good. Her condition worsened, and she spent most of her time watching television while avoiding other patients as she had before. She finally had enough of life and escaped the hospital, drowning herself in the Kennebec River. Her body was found by duck hunters about a week later in South Gardiner. Number 1. Mary Cowan. There's not much known of Mary Cowan's early life, though she is known to have been a poisoner. Cowan was indicted by a jury for murder by poisoning her boy, Willie Cowan, in September 1894. She was arrested and incarcerated in Penobscot County Jail. It was also alleged that she poisoned her former husband and children. Cowan composed a statement protesting that she was innocent and declared that she is the victim of her husband's plot to get rid of her. Her statement included letters from physicians who attended her husband on his deathbed, and they declared his death was not accompanied by poison. The letters that came from the physicians were misspelled and in other ways not noticeable for scholarly attainments. An exceptional history of crime was closed by the death of Mary Cowan in the Maine State Prison at Thomaston. Cowan's maiden name was Mary Knight, and she was married 3 times. Her first husband was Willis Bean of Dixmont, Maine, which is also the town she lived with her parents. Bean was the son of a farmer when she first met him. Soon after they had married, he conceived a desire to become a physician. Cowan, whose name changed to Bean after marriage, encouraged her husband in his desire and expressed the intention to study medicine herself. Unfortunately, they had little money and 3 children who were regarded as an obstacle to the accomplishment for their plans. One day the youngest of the children was found smothered in bed, and a neighbor believed Cowan had been careless to notice her child's death because she informed her before she even realized it for herself. People of Dixmont believed she killed her child to get rid of it, and the fact she stated, "I didn't know the child died half an hour ago," when no investigation was made in the first place. Soon after, the other 2 children, who were 2 and 3 years old, died from a stomach complaint. There were suspicions whispered among the neighbors, but the deaths of the Bean children were forgotten for some time after they were laid away in the village churchyard at Plymouth. Bean pursued his medical studies in what was known as a Druidical Institute, where it was said diplomas could be purchased for $25 or less. Unluckily for Bean, the legislature regarded the diploma as a fraud, which killed it before he had secured his diploma. Bean and his wife then decided to attend a similar institution in Ohio, where without many studies they might get diplomas. Before leaving, Bean succeeded upon his parents to invest all their ready money in a farm, upon which he was to live when he returned from the West. The farm was purchased, and Bean received the deed which he gave to his parents, so they can mortgage it for him. For differing reasons, this mortgage was never recorded but was kept in the house of the elder Bean. Willis Bean and his wife then borrowed $200 to go to Ohio Medical School, where Bean died unsuspectingly. Doctors were unable to diagnose his cause of death until later, when it was said he died of stomach trouble, which was similar to his children's deaths. She decided to move into his parents' place for a few weeks when it was discovered one day that the unrecorded mortgage had disappeared. Young Cowan had the deed of the farm, and the land, which had been bought with Elder Bean's money, was hers in law. Upon this knowledge, she sold the farm and received about $2,000 for it. Elder Bean's carelessness caused the family this loss because it was unrecorded. No one in Dixmont had any ambiguity that she had stolen the mortgage. Shortly after this exchange, Cowan married her second husband, George Taylor, who was also in the Dixmont area and was employed in one of the Lewiston mills. Taylor was a part of the Odd Fellows, and it appeared he had some insurance in that order. He also died due to the same stomach issues that carried off the Beans to their deathbeds. It was known by the Oddfellows Lodge that Taylor had not paid his dues and his insurance had lapsed. They found out that he had a wife in grief, so they donated a fund of several $100s for the widow. Cowan did not remain a widow for long and married a man named Elias Cowan, who was also a widower with one child named Willis, aged 8 years old. Mr. Cowan had deeded his farm to Mrs. Cowan. The only way she could get his deed was if his son had died, because he attained to most of the farm. Once Mrs. Cowan found out her husband's child died in September 1984 to the same stomach trouble that had affected the Beans and the Taylor family. The case was investigated, with results that pointed at Mrs. Cowan, who poisoned the boy with arsenic. The body was sent to Bowdoin College for an analysis, and the chemist reported that the stomach contained enough arsenic to kill an ox. Mrs. Cowan was convicted of murder in the first degree. A doctor who lived in the same area of Cowan was familiar with circumstances attending the deaths of the other members of Mrs. Cowan's families. It was said that he had told Mrs. Cowan if her third husband died of this mysterious stomach trouble, there would be an investigation. Cowan recovered, but there are people in Dixmont who declared that this was merely a break for him because if she hadn't been arrested for his boy's death, he would be dead himself. There's a great deal of evidence for Mrs. Cowan's trial. One case came from a little girl of the neighborhood who saw her put a white powder into the boy's medicine. The child did not testify earlier due to her father telling her not to because if Mrs. Cowan was not convicted, he feared that she would poison his child too. Mrs. Cowan had always maintained her innocence, but there was nothing to support her out of this situation, and her career as a poisoner died off. In the end, she was convicted of 6 counts of murder, all for the sake of a little money each time. Thanks to those who watched all the way through the video, and I hope you learned something new about the horrifying serial killers in Maine. Thanks again for all your support, guys, and be sure to click the bell icon after you subscribe so it keeps you up to date when we post. The next state we will be working on is Maryland, and more on mobile serial killers who killed in multiple states. Stay tuned everyone, and have an excellent weekend. Peace, guys.